So welcome everyone. It is time. So we started last week. First of all, I want to wish everybody a Chag Urim Sameach. Of course, we wish Urim comes from the word or light, and unlike other holidays which we wish, Chag Sameach, Chag connotates. Chag is actually a special word. Chag is used for specific holidays, and Chagim are actually a chag really comes from the word a set time, like a chug in Hebrew is a pastime. In other words, it's designated as a particular point in time, and it refers to the holidays that are described in the Torah. Of course, it's Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. We have the holiday of Pesach and Shavuot. Those holidays are mentioned in the Torah. Those are technically the Chagim. So when you say Chag Sameach, technically, if you want to call it in terms of the correct verbiage, those are what you are referring to, and it's incorrect kind of to use it with respect to Hanukkah or even Purim, because they are not Chagim in the same light. They are certainly holidays, but they're not in that same category as Chagim. And so one of the ways of saying, either we say Happy Hanukkah or Hanukkah Sameach, or we say Chag Urim Sameach. We add the word light, Chag Urim Sameach, to connotate the fact that it's in a different kind of category, in a different group than that which are set in the Chag umbrella. But regardless, I wish that not only for us and for you, that the light, especially in the winter when it's dark, but in the world right now, we need as much brightness and light and hope. That's what really light and warmth, and what light really represents. And that is why the first thing that God created, of course, was what? Was light. That was the first thing that was created in the world as soon as it was too dark. And of course, God can see through anything, doesn't he? But it's that whole idea of not having darkness and dispelling the darkness with light. So I want to open with those remarks. I want to give everyone a quick synopsis of chapter 1. We started Samuel 1. Chapter 1 last week, where we introduced to a family. We're introduced to Elkanah with his two wives, Pnina and Hannah. Pnina has children, Hannah does not, and Hannah ends up praying to God, and God finally, after quite a while, he gives she has a child. However, it was done on condition that once the child will be given up by the family, by the parents, and the child will be consecrated to God. In other words, the child will serve God, will actually be taken to the Kohen Gadol, to the temple, where he would live and would serve God. And this is what happens at the end of the chapter. At the end of the chapter, the child grows up. He's of a certain age where he can fend for himself. He's no longer at the mercy of his mother in the sense of for sustainability. And she takes him to the temple. And now the Kohen Gadol, who's Eli, he's the one who's going to raise him. And so this is literally where we are. We're literally at the point where she drops off her son. Okay? Oh, we have one more here. We'll wait just 1 minute. Somebody just entered. Here we are. So we're just about to start chapter number 2. And as I mentioned, this is the point where Hannah literally just dropped off her child, Shmuel, because God had heard, Shamael, God heard, God answered my plea for a child, and she drops him off. And the first thing she does is Vatit Palel Hannah Vatomar, and Hannah prayed, and this is what she said: Alatz libi ladonai, my heart exalts, my heart is happy, is overgrown in the Lord. Ramah karni baronai, I have triumphed through the Lord. Rachaf pi al oyevai, I gloat over my enemies. Ki samachti bishuatecha, I rejoice in your deliverance. So this is quite a little poem, which will continue a little bit in a couple of verses as well. So let's break it down a little bit. First is Alatz libi baronai, my heart exalts in the Lord. Of course, any parent who gives up their child, especially after praying for a child for so long can't truly be in a state of exaltation, but she witnessed such belief in the sense that the when she prayed to God and God answered her, and Eli told her, you're going to have a child coming up, etc., that your request will be answered, and she sees it coming to fruition. So her faith is incredibly enriched, and this is what her heart right now. She has to find the reason why she's giving up, of course, her child, which no parent would ever want, but she's realizing it, that this is her obligation to the Lord. This is what she promised in terms of the condition of having that child. And so it's her heart that has to do with God. In other words, she's happy that she's been able to fulfill the mandate that she had with God. But of course, her heart is shattered with the fact that she's giving up her child. Ramak Korni Baronai. Here, what is a keren? A keren is a horn. A keren is a sign of strength. In the animal kingdom, you see buffaloes, you see rams, you see other animals that have horns. This is how they clash. They use their horns as their sign of dominance or a sign of strength. And so here she's saying, I'm mustering up my strength at a time maybe that she should be questioning God or having doubt. She's strengthening, and she's resolute in terms of what she has to go through. This is strength of this is a woman with great strength, and especially great spiritual strength. Rachav pi al oivai, my mouth is widened on my enemies. Who are her enemies? Anybody? Who's the enemy that she's talking about?
Going to ask.
Who?
I was going to ask you that. Who?
Yeah. Who's her enemies? What? Suddenly she has enemies? What? She's fighting with some. Who are her enemy, or who is her enemy?
The other wife?
Judy, was that Judy that said her other wife?
Yeah.
Exactly. If you remember from chapter 1, and those that weren't here will remember that Pnina, who was the other wife, would gloat and would cause her a lot of anguish, especially when they went to the temple. Every once in a while, they went usually around once a year, and she would gloat, and she would really stick it to Pnina, would remind her that she's childless. So this is where she finally says, I'm not gloating, but I'm above my enemies. In other words, I've waited, and finally I've triumphed in the sense that I have a child. I've come to my own. I can hold my own. Ki samachti bishuatecha, for I have. What's the rejoicing? That I've had that child in your deliverance. That was part of God's promise in terms of the reciprocal nature of the deal, so to speak, that God will give her a child, but once the child would be of age, would be taken by the Kohen. So she continues on in singing, Ein kadosh kadonai ki ein bilatecha. There is no one holy as the Lord. Surely there is none beside you, as in your greatness. There is no end, no beginning. Ve'ein sur kelohenu. There is no rock like our God. Again, this is all her relationship with God. In other words, it's almost like she's deflecting her inner feelings, personal feelings, but she's focusing on her strength. Her strength right now, where she's receiving it, is her spirituality, that which actually gave her life, in the sense that she was distraught being childless. Once she had a child, she finally came to be her own. And as the psukim in the previous chapter described, that she was in such a low place, but once she had the child, she finally flourished. And she realizes that the child will still be. And doesn't mean that she's not going to continue to have a relationship with her child. It's just that she is no longer responsible for rearing him up. The child has a task, and that is to remain and to work in the Beit HaMikdash. Al tarburu tedaberu gevoha gevoha. Talk no more with lofty pride. Yetze'atak mipichem. Let no arrogance continue to cross your lips. Ki el deot Adonai, for God is all-knowing. Velo nitkenu alilot. By him actions are measured. So anybody wants to give a crack at this pasuk, number 3? Who is she talking about again? don't speak so great and don't be so arrogant with your lips. Who is she speaking to again?
I
Same
thought she's
woman.
still speaking to Penina.
Absolutely. She's continuing to express, I think, her frustration over the years in the sense of how much she was hurt, that she's finally overcome. And if, by the way, we see this commonly. You see with Rachel as well. When Rachel and Leah have that, if you want to call it that challenge of being almost in competition, even though technically they're not. It's, one gives birth, the other gives birth. It's not they're standing in a line and seeing who's popping out more babies, but it was just naturally if in those days, especially and we see today too, where somebody who's very motherly and that what she wants is to have a child and can't do it. She feels herself that she's not worth. She's not, especially to her husband, who she can't give him a hair. Without that, she knows that her line is going to end. And so that frustration finally came to an end. Imagine just being poked in the eye all the time. Finally, she's saying, I have an heir too. And after all, God knew what timing was for me. But at the end of the day, God spoke. In other words, maybe I wasn't supposed to have a child that far back, but at the end, I did have I had a child. Keshet giborim chatim v'nichshalim azrucha. The bows of mighty have been broken, and the faltering are girded with strength. And again, this is all an illusion of that fight, that challenge that she's had with Penina. In other words, mightier, people with much more strength, people with much more value, or she's just saying how silly words are of hurt, because at the end of the day, they created absolutely nothing. They were worthless. Seveim balechem niskaru, or evim chadelu, ad akara yalda shiva, verabat banim umlala. Men once sated must hire out of bread. Men once hungry, hunger no more. While the barren woman bears 7, the mother of many is forlorn. And then we have the following: Adonai memitu mechaye, morid sheol vaya'al. These are incredibly verses that we use in different. By the way, this chapter as well, chapter 1 and chapter 2 are the haftarot that we read. Is the haftarah that we read on Rosh Hashanah, and we discussed it in terms of she was at her plea was actually answered on Rosh Hashanah. This is when she used to go to the Beit HaMikdash. The Lord deals death and gives life, casts down into Sheol, which is into the depths, and raises up. Sheol also comes from the word lishol or shaul, or from a question. And a question, if you don't have an answer, it's the depth. In other words, it's a hole, right? What is a question? When you ask somebody and somebody doesn't have an answer, it's like a hole. So God brings from a hole, like anywhere deep that has no end, an answer closes that hole up, that gap. But without an answer, it's Sheol. It's a deep pit that never ends. Adonai morishu ma'ashir, mashpil af mirmem. Lord makes poor and makes rich. He casts down, he also lifts up. In other words, she's showing here the dichotomy of the feelings which she had. At one point, she felt poor. She had nothing, not only just monetarily in terms of her value, her personal value, and she felt so low. And God, within one swoop, God can change the entire makeup, the entire scenario. Mekim me'afar dal, God raises the poor from dust. Me'ashpot yarim evyon. We are singing this every day right now in Chanukah. These are verses which we say in the Hallel. God raises the poor from dust, lifts up the needy from garbage, from that which is thrown out. Lehoshiv im nedivim, setting them with nobles. V'chiseh chavod yanchilem, granting them the seats of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's. He has set the world upon them. In other words, God created everything. God brings everything to be. It's not up to us. God decides, and here she's kind of merging not only her plight of having a child, but she's actually recognizing that this is all part of the plan, that she has to give up her child. It's a very hard thing to do, but she realizes this is all part of the plan. Was somebody trying to ask a question?
Yeah, Yossi, who wrote this?
So there, if I'm not mistaken, there are two different, I forget, I think Shmuel wrote most of the prophets. Then there is another author as well, I forget, but I will get you that answer for next lesson that we have.
No, the reason I asked, it's unusually flowery language.
So this is flowery because this is poetic. This is she's singing.
Yeah.
And if you remember, the whole story begins with her praying, and she's praying with her lips are moving. There's no words coming out of her lips, and Eli thinks that she's drunk because she's uttering. There was no words, and now suddenly this is again a change. That's a really good point, Mark. Kind of in light of her song that she's speaking about, two dynamics, from bottom to height, from dark to lightness, to from poor to rich, from all these differences, but two opposite sides of the equation. And she's also now, her words that are coming out of her mouth that are so beautiful. When she was in turmoil, when she did not have her child, she simply could not even utter a sound, so to speak, to the point that Eli thinks that she was a drunk. And now, as you say, Mark, it's just flowery, beautiful language. If you notice, by the way, this poem does not rhyme. A lot of times poems rhyme in certain, at least in certain sequences. This rhymes in theme. If you break it down again, you'll see it's threes and threes, and it breaks down in themes of what she's trying to convey, of course, coming from such low to up to high, and where we put our trust, that our trust is at the end of the day in God. Somebody was saying something? Raglei chasidav yishmor, urshaim b'choshech yidamu, kilo v'choach igbar ish. Do you see that the three that I'm talking about? Do you see this? Do you see this step? So first is he guards the steps of his faithful, in other words, those who follow him, but the wicked perish in darkness, for not by strength shall man prevail. In other words, she's right now recognizing that it all depends on belief. So it's broken down the poem into three ideas, almost every single pasuk. Adonai yechatu merivav, alav bashamayim yarem. The foes of the Lord shall be shattered. God will thunder against them in the heavens. Adonai yadin afse aretz veiten oz lemalko ve'arem keren meshicho. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give power to his king and triumph to his anointed one.
Yossi, can I ask, the word Karen here
Yes.
is repeated from a previous verse.
Yes. So the
Karen
was right at the beginning, the first pasuk. You're absolutely right. Right here. I know. I will share it.
Carney.
Okay, right there. Karnei, Karen. In Hebrew, you have it's a root of three, kuf, resh, and nun. So karni, okay, Ramah karni, my horn or my strength. The word Karen is synonymous with strength. Okay, so in other words, she's speaking about my strength is in my Lord, is in God. In other words, it's her spirituality, because I'm sure as a mother, she was devastated having to give up her child, but she's going through with how this whole episode started. It was praying to God, asking God, believe that God would answer her, and that was what God put forward, that the child had to be raised by the Kohanim. She understands that's her strength, and she's right now drawing the strength from God. And let's look at the last pasuk in this section. Ve'arem keren meshicho, and triumph, or God will give the strength, will uplift, will empower, maybe meshicho, his anointed one, referring to, of course, Mashiach. It's a very interesting. This is a very difficult pasuk to actually understand. A lot of commentaries say that she had some kind of nevuah, she had some kind of prophecy or foresight with regards to Viten Oz lemalko, to his king. There were no kings at that time, so you can and who's God giving Oz? God will give power, will give greatness to his king. Who's what king? There is no king right now, right? And of course, Shmuel would be the one who would anoint the first king, Shaul, which we'll read about it shortly. So this is all foreshadowing that which is going to happen in the future, so that which is about to happen with the life of her son. Okay?
Yossi, the Haftorah for Rosh Hashanah ends at the end of verse 10, chapter 2.
Right here. It ends right here. Ve'arem keren meshicho.
Yeah.
Exactly. But the story continues, and let's continue. So there's about 3 or 4 different themes in this chapter of what happens. But again, chapter 1 was that we introduced to Elkanah his 2 wives, Penina and Hannah, and of course the birth of Shmuel. Right now we had just the beautiful poem, the song of, in a way, it's almost like a goodbye, but a continuation. And I think part of that song also is not only belief, but that Hannah understands that God will also take care of who? Of her son. Because this is what he requested of her, that he will grow up there. As a mother, the one thing you want is the success, the growth, the health of your child. She's now putting her son in the care of God. And she says, God is all that, only good things basically also can come out of my son. Let's continue. Vayelech Elkanah haramata al beito, and so Elkanah returns back to his home. By the way, when we say Elkanah, we mean the entire family. So whoever was with them in Shiloh, they return back to home. The Hannah haraya misharetet Adonai, and the lad, the boy, that's Shmuel. He is serving God et pnei Eli Kohen, under the guide of Eli the Kohen. Uvne Eli, however, Eli had 2 children. He had 2 sons, but his sons, Bnei Belial, they were scoundrels. Belial was also a pagan god, with very immoral, very low standards. So they were not good people. Lo yadu et Adonai, they did not know God. And I think it's very interesting to note that belief is not necessarily brought down, from one generation to another. In other words, you can have a great rabbi. It doesn't necessarily mean that his children, just because they're born to him, will be great if they don't do their work. And Bnei Eli lo yadu, they know God, but they're working also, as you'll notice, they're working in the Beit HaMikdash. What do you mean they don't know God? How do they not? They are not connected with God, and that is a personal decision. They could have. They are part of a lineage of people who should be, or expected to be close with God, but they simply don't know. They don't want to know. Lo yadu. They're not making themselves familiar with God. And it shows each and every one of us that it's not your lineage. Everybody has the opportunity to get close to God, but at the same time, everyone also has the opportunity to push themselves away. It doesn't make a difference in terms of where you come from, although, of course, it does help a start.
But they're Kohanim, right?
Yes. Eli is the Kohen Gadol, and he has 2 children who are scoundrels, okay? Or literally scoundrels. Umishpata Kohanim et ha'am, and this is how the Kohanim, and they're specifically speaking about his 2 children, okay? About Eli's 2 children. This is how the priests used to deal with the people. Kol ish zovach zevach, each person who would come and bring up an offering. Uva nar hakohen kevashel habasar, the priest's boy would come along, v'hamazleg shlosha shinam be'ado, as they are preparing, as they're burning this offering. The kohen, as they're cooking it, the kohen would take this 3-pronged fork and kind of stick it into the stew, into where it is being cooked, as it is boiling. Why, I will explain shortly. Vehika vakior ovadud, o vakalachat ova parur, and he would thrust it into the cauldron or into the kettle or the great pot or the small cooking pot where they are preparing this the meat. Whatever the kohen, in other words, he puts in this fork. Whatever comes out of the fork, the kohen takes. This is how they dealt with all the sacrifices that the nation would bring up. So what are they talking about here? Okay, and then we're gonna fix, and the next pasuk really explains it. So imagine they're cooking a stew, some kind of, in terms of that which the kohen is permitted to eat from. There are some korbanot that are burnt wholly, and what I mean by whole with a W in its entirety. There's nothing to be eaten. Sometimes kohanim get parts. What parts would kohen usually get? The kohen usually would get out of the breast of the animal or shoulders. But here it's very clear that what do? They kind of take their some kind of pitchfork, some kind of utensil that has 3 prongs, which kind of, I guess, looks like, salad, one of these salad tossing, or a turkey carver, like that usually has 2, but imagine a 3-pronged thing. As they're mixing it up and they're trying to fish something out, whatever comes out, they're going to take. And let's find out, what do they take? Do you think they take the good stuff or the bad stuff?
What a question.
What do you think? They're being right now described as wicked. What do you think they're going to be taking?
First, it's the good stuff.
Exactly. So let's find out what they're taking. So in other words, they're already, and by the way, the whole idea of while it's still cooking, it's very clear that it's not yet burnt or prepared. Right? It's not yet, they're just taking it out. And here, gam beterem yaktirut hachelev, but now even before the fatty parts are set into smoke, are cooked properly, uva nar hakohen, the priest's boy, one of his children, would come, ve'amar laisha zoveach, and he tells the person who came to offer the offerings, Tenav vasar litzlot lakohen, hand over some meat, some raw meat, to roast for the priest. V'lo yikach mimcha basar mevushal ki imcha, and I do not want to accept, I will not accept from you anything that is boiled. Please only give me some raw meat. They only had the permission to receive that which is cooked. And not only that, what does it say? Before they even make the offering of the fat always was seen as the juiciest, the best part. I know now we know kind of, we're not supposed to eat the fat, but every time we say chelev, it's the juiciest, the best part. That was always supposed to go to God. That was the whole idea of the sacrifice. But here, even before God got his share, so to speak, they're already making a deal. They are forcing the person who comes to offer. They're telling him, hey, give me some raw meat. I want some meat. I do not accept anything that is cooked. Any idea why? Why? Why
Do
they
you think
asking?
because they're concerned that it's not being cooked, that it's not being cooked properly?
So they can oversee it to make sure that it's being cooked.
Yeah.
Why are they demanding a raw piece?
Because so then they'll cook it. No?
Okay. So one is that they can, perhaps they want to do whatever way they want to do it, right? And not wait.
I'm
maybe
thinking of kashrut.
right. No, but they are right now in the temple. They're the ones who are responsible for kashrut. They're the ones who are overseeing this, and they're saying them from your pot here, you give me a piece before everything else gets cooked, even the fat. Give me something we want raw. We don't want something cooked.
Yeah.
So obviously, in those days, I mean, now you go to if you go to Mehadrin, like you'll anything that is pre-cooked is also very, very expensive. But in those days, the value was actually in things that were raw. In terms of before you cooked it, you'd be able to sell it. Once you cooked it, it was already yours. It was almost seen like leftovers. It's not like here, like it was seen as a luxury. In the olden days, if you would have taken, and imagine this is happening a lot of time, they can't possibly eat all this meat, right? Eat 1 pot, 2 pots, but how much can you eat in a day? So what do they want to do? They're going to try to sell it. So they want something raw, something that is liquid, something that they can sell. But they're taking this before even God, so to speak, gets their portion, and they're not even taking it prepared. Vayomer alav ha'ish, and usually the person who is brought the sacrifice usually would respond, Kater yak tirun hayom hachelef vekachla. You know what? Let them first turn the suet into smoke. Kasher taven afshecha v'amar lo, ki ata titen velo lakachti bechoska. No, what ended up happening, this was actually done by force. The people who came in would know the rules, and they would say, no, you can't touch anything. Because until that the fatty pieces are not smoked and burned, you can't touch. However, the Kohanim, his children, Eli's children, would say, no, hand it over at once, or we'll take it by force. In other words, this is really, they're stealing basically, with no regards, number one, to the procedure, nor to God in terms of the whole idea of somebody bringing an offering. It was not the Kohen would be able to use it, but only once the one who is making an offering gets his the reason for coming there, which is what? Offering it to God. The sin of these 2 children of Eli were great in the face of God. Kini atzu anashim et minchat Adonai, for the men mistreated, or they poisoned, they ruined the gift or the offering that was trying to be given to God. In other words, they spoiled everything.
Yes.
However, yes.
Did their father Eli know anything that was going on?
Let's continue and we'll find out. Great question, Henry. Have a little bit of patience. But great question, that will be answered shortly. Ushmuel mesharet et panei Adonai, but Shmuel, he is serving God. Nar chagur ephod bad, he is girded with the linen ephod. What's here? What is this pasuk talking about? So we're saying Shmuel is serving God, God's face, Mesharet. Mesharet, by the way, is, we have Yehoshua was Mesharet, and Moshe, he would serve him. In other words, he did it with all his heart. He did it openly and with love and properly. So in other words, he was doing it correctly.
What is Panei?
Na'ar chagur ephod bad. He was one who wore a linen ephod. Any idea what that means? So it's an allusion, perhaps the other Kohanim made fun of the clothing. And Eli here, which is what did Kohanim wear? Kohanim wore the ephods. He was obviously treated just as a Kohen. He had an incredible role as a young lad, but he did it as it was supposed to be done. In other words, he was following the rules. That's very clear what this pasuk is saying. Umeil katon taselo imo. His mother would also made him a little robe. Ve'alta lo miyamim, and she would visit him. She would bring it up to him every year as he grew out of the little coat or little overcoat for warmth. She would bring every time she would come. When balota tisha lizbach et zebach hayamim, as we read in the first chapter, once every so often they would go up to Shiloh, to the temple, to bring up sacrifices or annual sacrifices. And she, of course, continued to come. But every time she would continue, she would continue to give him clothing. What does this represent?
Well, her dedication to her son.
Exactly. In other words, she still had a relationship, even though at the beginning, it seems like she's leaving her child. Yes, it's kind of like, if you want to call it, when you send your child to boarding school, doesn't mean that that's it. You're no longer connected to your son. No, absolutely not. Your child is still part of who you are. Now he's just living with foster parents, so to speak. He's right now being raised by the temple, but she would come and visit him and also bring him necessities.
Once a year?
They would go up to Shiloh once a year.
Sugar.
Yeah. Uveirach Eli et El. By the way, it also makes sense because anybody. I know when I went to boarding school. I went to yeshiva in Ottawa. Granted, it's, mind you, I guarantee you, I think Ottawa, the distance between Har Ephraim and Shiloh were less than the Montreal and Ottawa. But regardless, it was very easy for why don't parents in a boarding school come and visit, every other day, or in camp, right? If anybody has camp, right? What for children who go to the first time that they go to camp, what do they have? They're homesick. It's very difficult for them. They want to go back. I remember with my son as well, when I dropped him off in university in Utah. Within 2 days, he called me up. I want to go back home. I don't like it here. I have to come here. And you can't fly back and say, no, I'm going to come by. You'll see him. I'm just around the corner. If you don't let them get through that initial period, they will not succeed on their own. So they have to go out. They feel that disconnect, and suddenly they grow. They understand that they can go visit. We didn't leave them, but the initial period there would be a little bit of hurt, but they have to ensure that the child is there almost alone. But of course, the child is being taken care of. But for the child's also long-term success, the parent can't come and visit them on a daily basis, or else the child would never be able to I don't say disconnect in a negative way, but to be able to function properly without his parents by their side all the time. So yes, they were not able to visit every single day. However,
Jesse, there was no woman involved in his upbringing then?
it's not necessarily that. The idea is that the temple, that he is growing up in the service of God. It doesn't say exactly who's bringing him up, so to speak. This is, we read between the lines. We're not here interested in who's preparing his meals and who's washing his clothes and whether he has a mother and a father figure. It's just the idea that he is not raised by his biological parents, and that he is a product of serving God. Okay?
No, but I'm listening.
Uveirach Eli et Elkanah ve'et ishto. And every time Elkanah and his wife come, and of course to Shiloh, Eli the Kohen would bless them. Ve'amar, and he would say, Yasem Adonai lecha zera min ha'isha azot, tachat ha'sheila asher sha'al Adonai ve'alchu limkomo. And so Eli blesses them. What does it say? He says again, may God bless and give you more seeds, more offsprings from this woman, in place of that which God has asked as a loan from her. In other words, in return of the child which you left here, may God bless you. May God bless you with more children. So remember, this was a barren lady. Kifakad Adonai et Chana, vatahar vatelet shlosha vanim u'shtei vanot. And the God listened, and Chana gave birth to 3 more boys, u'shtei vanot, and 2 girls, vayigdal hana'ar Shmuel im Adonai, and the lad Shmuel grew up, or he was raised amongst God. In other words, in the service of God. So at the end of this second section of this, she not only has one child. Through all this, she now has 3 more boys and 2 more girls.
She did not give to service the way Shmuel was.
By the way, there's a very interesting there's an interesting commentary which I read, and this actually is a very important dynamic in the sense of receiving more children, and part of that is she can't say, well, God, you owe me. I gave you. We had a child, great, but at the end of the day, the last thing that happened was I gave you, right? Like you gave me, then I gave you. Now, once I gave you, now you owe me. So throughout this whole dichotomy, and that's a very humanistic way, of course, saying it. There was a very clear set of rules or guide, but here God also gave her not 1 in return, 3 more boys, 2 more girls. So she had definitely her hands full in terms of rearing them, and having years of being productive and giving her husband a future in terms of the name for the family. So it's 6 times, so to speak. The riches are multiplied by 6. Ve'eli zaken me'od, and here, by the way, Henry, here's part of your answer. Ve'eli zaken me'od, and this is after some time. Eli is now quite old. What does it mean, zaken me'od? Is that he's no longer able to quite take care of all the functions, or it's becoming clear that his tenure is about to end, or soon is going to end. And what happens? V'shamat kol asher yasun banav lechol Yisrael. He suddenly starts hearing, or he heard during this time, that which his sons have been doing to all those visitors that come to the temple. Furthermore, vet asher yishkavun et hanashim hatzovot petach ol mohed, and further that which they were promiscuous with the women who came to do certain tasks at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So there were women who would come also to take care of the temple, and it was very clear that Eli's sons were not behaving properly with them, or
So Yossi,
which expected. Yes.
so sexual exploitation here gets half a line, and the offense of sticking a fork into a boiling cauldron of meat gets a paragraph or 2. It seems to me that the offenses are not proportionally represented in the
I
I'm being facetious, of course, but it's
I know. So
one is an offense against the Lord for desecrating a sacrifice, and the other is obviously on a more human level, but
right.
still.
So I mean, it's a really great question. When I was going over it, it's we're also tainted, and I don't say tainted by in a negative way, but we have, let's say, our goggles are the goggles that we wear in this generation of the way that we view items or social subjects with the glasses, or the view, or the color, the hue of the lights that are in this generation. You have to understand that anything that you did not do proper in Beit HaMikdash was first of all, it was in the house of the Lord. This was on the outside, Petach Ol Moed. There's a distinction between inside the house and outside the house. Not to belittle this transgression, not at all. But there is nothing greater. The first of 10 commandments is what?
I am the
I'm the Lord your God.
I'm the Lord. And then later on, there is down in terms of sexual relations, etc., is also immoral and improper, but there's still a hierarchy. So when you see it even today. Somebody goes before the court and transgressed or did a bunch of different things. The first thing that is measured usually is the most significant offense. or that which is seen as the greatest. And then later on, they mark, they also did this, he did this, and this was the punishment, this is the punishment, etc. But always the gravest would be the beginning. And it's also in line. In other words, don't look at it as just how important it is, so that's why how deep it is. It's where it first started. In other words, they didn't even have any shame or hesitation to disgrace God. So of course they're not going to have any shame in disgracing human beings. Understand? In other words, if they weren't scared of the ultimate, of course it's going to trickle down. But this is again just a humanistic. Some of their sins might not be able to, as non-Kohanim, we would not be able to relate to. No, they also transgressed sins that each and every one of us can relate to. So it's not only that they had the opportunity of disgracing God, but they also disgraced any ill performance that anybody else could have done. They were scoundrels. They were low of lows. That's really what it is. I don't think we're reading it. The point of this was not whether what is greater, like disgracing God or sexual. But Chaim, I appreciate your I hope that's somewhat of an answer in terms of what is happening here. Okay.
We don't see the follow on.
Pardon?
We don't see the next paragraph. Maybe it's going to refer to it.
Yeah, let's continue. In other words, they are now, Eli has heard of all these it's disgraceful, all the disgraceful acts which they have done. Okay, and in particular, not only that which they've done to Israel. What is the Israel? Israel was that they were disgracing the olot, the offerings. And by the way, sages say that because of their behavior and their threatening, they were doing it violently, as you heard beforehand, that even if somebody said no, let us first burn, let us go through it, they would say no. We will take it from you by force. What ended up happening is people stopped coming to the temple. That is why it's lechol Israel, to everyone. And then also in terms of once people were not coming as much, they were not as busy, and now they are actually going outside, seeing what's happening in the front yard, backyard, seeing they have time, and they have time to meddle around with these women that have come to perform tasks. And again, of course, Chaim, as you said, certainly the same way that they're using their power and their aggressiveness against those who come just to offer, certainly they were using their power and their forcefulness against these women too. Vayomer lahem, so Eli the Kohen speaks to them. Lama tasu kadvarim ha'ele? Why are you doing all these things? Asher anochi shomea, which I hear. What do I hear that all these people are complaining? Al banai, please, my sons, don't. It's not nice, and it's not a favorable report, that which I hear. Mavirim amadonai, that which the people of the Lord are speaking. And here, this is, by the way, where the criticism of Eli comes. Let me just continue here. If a man sins against a man, God may pardon him. However, if a man sins against God, who can pray for them? However, they did not listen to their father. And this is a very troublesome sentence, and I'll explain to you why did they not listen. For God has resolved that they should die. It's almost like as though God is disabling them from returning from their ways. So now we see, by the way, Chaim, again, as I was mentioning. So if one sins against one another, God can pardon. But if one performs and sins against God, who's going to pardon them? So it's a much stricter, a graver sin, so to speak, according to their father. as you can tell, there was a very big disconnect between Eli and his children, a huge disconnect. And it's almost funny, if you're looking at the dynamic of Hannah, who has no children, who promises to bring the child to the Lord, he's growing up in properly. He's growing up with he's a decent human being. And here you have Eli, the highest spiritual leader of the nation, and his children are exactly the opposite. That to the point where, what does it pasuk say? Ki chafetz Adonai lamitam. God's resolve or desire is to that for their demise. That's how bad they are. And I think we see this dichotomy of the way that they're raised. And a lot of Mefarshim say, where does Eli fail? He never acts. He says words, he warns them, he said, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, but he never actually gives them any punishment. He never reprimands them for that which they are doing. Had he known what they are doing in the temple, how does he allow them to continue to do the service? He should have appointed others in order to do it. Vehanar Shmuel, and the child, the lad Shmuel, holech vegadel vetov. He's growing. He's vegamim Adonai vegamim anashim. Shmuel is growing in favorite in positivity, in popularity, if you wish, with God, but also with people. In other words, he's a very likable person. He's behaving properly. He's seen as a positive light in the temple. Vayavo ish Elohim el Eli, and a man of God came to Eli. Interesting to note, this is almost, we have an anonymous person. However, commentaries say this is actually Elkanah. So his father comes to Eli. He's Ish Elohim, he's following God. Vayomer elav, and he tells Eli, Ko amar Adonai, this is what God has said. Haniglo nigleti el beit avicha biutam b'mitzrayim leveit paro. Thus said the Lord. This is what Elkanah is telling Eli. Lo, I've revealed myself to your father's house in Egypt when they were subject to the house of Pharaoh. In other words, we had a connection. You come from a very important lineage. And not only that, and I've chosen, God is speaking through this person. He says, did I not choose you, this particular family, from the entire tribes of Israel, in order for you to be Kohanim, to be my priests, La'alot al mizbechi, in order for you to perform all the acts of that which to burn, ascend on my altar, La'aktir ketoret, to bring and to burn incense, Laset ephod lefanai, to carry, to wear an ephod, to be properly dressed. Remember the allusion to Shmuel? Mm-hmm. Shmuel was wearing an ephod. He was proper. It's an allusion that they were not properly dressed. They were not wearing the right garments. They were dirty. They didn't take care of it. They scoffed at it. They were not keeping up that look. I've assigned to your father's household all the offerings by fire of the Israelites. And here the explanation is, if we look at the lineage of Aharon, Aharon had 4 children. It was supposed to be Elazar who was going to receive the kehuna. It ended up going to the family of Itamar. And this is where they are. They're the children of Itamar. And he's saying, not only that, I've chosen that specific family, and look what you're doing. You are disgracing. Why do you maliciously trample, livot, to kick, to trample on the sacrifices and the offerings, asher tziviti ma'on, which I have commanded you? You have honored your sons more than you've honored me. Lehavri achem mereshit kol minchat Yisrael ami. When you have fed them, first the portion before you've even fed me from that which my people have brought me. Do you remember that idea with the fat? Before even the fat gets burnt, what do? They are taking out their meat. Even before not even God grievance, not even that they're not eating the right pieces, is the whole point is you defiled that which the Israelites have come to my people have come, and you have allowed your children to take before me. In other words, I'm second here. It's a disgrace. You've dishonored me. Lachen. Therefore,
Who was talking there?
Pardon?
Who was talking in that paragraph?
Which one? Number 29?
Yeah, this one.
God.
So this is God through that person who came to Eli. In other words, this is a prophecy. Here, this is Vayavo Ish Elohim, a man of God came to Eli, and this is what he's telling him that God told him. So he's telling him God is angry at you because you have allowed your children to eat before me. And God continues to say that you have disgraced and trampled on all my sacrifices.
What did they do with the sacrifices?
If you remember what they did was they were taking for themselves before they.
No, I know that, but I mean, if they didn't, when did God take his food?
So the first God that didn't come down and is sitting in the temple on his table waiting for it to be. God is not. The idea was that they were not sacrificing properly. First, the chelev, the fatty pieces, had to be burned until there was smoke rising. Then they would be able to pick out the pieces for themselves. What they were doing is, before it was even cooking, they would take out literally raw meat, perhaps not even throwing it into the stew or throwing it into that cauldron or whatever pot that they were using to burn it. In other words, they were selfish. They were taking it. They totally ransacked the procedure or the ritual of
That's
the.
Okay, you can carry on. We can.
Okay.
Discuss it privately.
Lachen, and so here comes the warning. Lachen, Neum Adonai Elohei Israel, surely declares the God of Israel. Amor Amarti, I've spoken. Every time we have double language, by the way, in Atandre, Amor Amarti, spoken I've said, or said I've said, means it's a serious, this is going to happen. Where do we have it? We have it in this parasha. Do you remember we have Paro? He dreams what?
The 7 good years and the 7 bad years, 7 bad years and 7 good years.
But the dream repeats. One time it's with cows. One time it's also with stock of wheat. Remember that?
Wheat, yeah.
So it's repeated. And Yosef says, why is it repeated?
For emphasis. Yeah.
For emphasis, exactly.
Yeah.
So this is again, we always have it. Abraham. When God calls to Abraham, it's not that Abraham doesn't hear him the first time, so he calls Abraham, doesn't answer, he calls Abraham again. It's a sign of love and a sign of importance that he wants to speak with him. The urgency of that. So Amor Amarti is, I've declared and sealed Beitcha Oveit Avicha, that your household and the household of your father, Yitalechu Lefanai Ad Olam. I've made a covenant that your house and your father's house would remain forever in my service. V'ata, however, Neum Adonai Chalilali. Now I have declared this should never happen. Far be it from me. Ki mechabdai achabed uvozai yekalu. For those who honor me, I will honor, but those who shame me will be dishonored. Hinei yamim baim. A time is coming, Vigadati et zaroecha, and I will break your power or your zera, your offspring, Vedzroa beit avicha, and your father's household, Miyot zaken beveitecha, from being the leader or the elder of your house. So now he is punishing Eli for that or Eli's future, okay, the descendants. V'hibatzta tsar ma'on b'chol asher yetiv et Israel. You will gaze grudgingly at all the bounty that will be bestowed on Israel. V'lo yezaken beveitcha kol ha'amim, and there shall never be an elder
in your house
forever. Ve'ish lo achrit lecha me'im mizbechi, lechalot et einecha ve'la'avid et nafshecha ve'chol marbit beitcha yamutu anashim. I shall not cut off all your offsprings from my altar, but to make your eyes pine and your spirit language, all the increase in your household shall die as ordinary men. In other words, there will be some remnant left, but by and large, a big portion of your family will no longer have that the prestige of the kehuna or the or being the Kohen Gadol. And I'll make for you a sign. V'zeh lecha ha'ot.
This is the letter, the sign.
This is, I'm sealing this decree with the following sign. Asher yavo el shnei vanecha, el Chofni uPinchas, biyom echad yamutu shnehem. This is the sign. Both of your sons, Chofni and Pinchas. This is not, by the way, Pinchas of the Torah.
Yeah.
Okay, this is generations after.
Well, we're several hundred years later.
It's
already.
about this is roughly about 400 years after they left Egypt. Okay. What is the symbol? The sign is that on the same day they will die, both of them on the same day. V'hakimoti li kohen eman, and I shall establish for myself a faithful priest. Kasher bilvavi uvnafshi aseh, that he will do that which is in my heart and in my soul. Of course, God doesn't have a heart, doesn't have a soul. That which I desire, or that which I have communicated with you, that is my desire. Uvaniti lo bait neman, I will build for him, I will establish for him a household, an enduring household. Veitalech lefanai meshichi kol hamim, and he will be my anointed one for all the days. V'haya kol hanotar beveitecha yavo lishtachavot lo, and you'll see all the remnants of your household will come to bow down before him, or will work for him, or will be under his control. Lagorat kesef v'chikar lachem. They will come up to him and ask him for the minimal pay and just some food. Ve'omar safcheni na el achat ha'kunot le'chol pat lechem. Please, they will beg him just to assign us to one of the priestly duties so that we may have a morsel of bread to be able to eat. So it ends off in a very dire strait for the family, or the line, the bloodline of Eli, to the point where a new Kohen is going to be established. Anybody who knows who this Kohen will be?
Samuel.
No, won't be Samuel. The Kohen Gadol is going to be
Oh, excuse me.
going to be Tzadok, and that's why also what's the name Tzedek? This is truth and purity in terms of what we have to do, and it's going to the whole idea was that the whole Eli's family will not be performing to the point that they don't know how to sustain for themselves, that they will be begging for priestly jobs just so that they can get paid, or how were they paid? They received the food of the by the way, when they say lechem, it's not only bread, because some of the breads, by the way, the show bread were eaten by the Kohanim, but from all the fat, taking all the best meats and abusing the rights to the point that even the little morsel, the simplest of foods, they will have to beg for. That is their punishment that it will be. So, any questions?
I have a question about the word cholila in Hebrew.
Yeah.
I know it in Yiddish, but I never knew where it was derived or from whence it was derived. And here it's interpreted as,
It's right.
I forget where it occurs.
Next pasuk.
Cholila.
Here.
Was something forbid, yes. Far be it from me is how it's translated.
Right.
What does it actually mean, cholila?
So the first time, if I'm not mistaken, in the text, if you wanna verify it, you can, Chaim, but this is off the top of my head. The first time chalila is actually found is when Abraham is having a discourse with God about Sodom.
Mhm.
When God tells him, I'm going to destroy it, Abraham says, Chalila lach masot kadavar hazeh. Chalila lach. God forbid. Chalila. Chal is like chol, is to make mundane. In other words, don't mundane yourself. Don't bring yourself, remove yourself from such a low act. So this, and then he begins, of course, that exchange of maybe there's 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. And this is Chalila, is we see it like God forbid.
Mhm.
In other words, Chalila li, I shall halal is something that is also removed from the city. In other words, when you find a halal, a dead body that is in no man's, I'm removing myself. Remove yourself from doing such a thing.
So it's a totally different charge than halal.
What then
It's
what?
a different charge than for halal.
No, halal is with a
Chal.
hay. Halal is with a hay.
Well, that's with a chet, yeah.
This is with a chet.
Chet.
It's not spelled the same way.
Huh.
Okay, so
I
chal,
looked up the dictionary, and the Chalila is like God forbid.
yeah, God forbid. But where it comes, that's the expression is God forbid. In other words, but remove me from that. I'm put me as far away from that as possible.
But in this context, it's the Lord speaking. So
Yeah.
he
And
would-
again, we use it. We use this chalila is we say God forbid. In other words, God, God will even the ultimate is God will not allow it to happen. Or here it's chalila li. I will remove myself furthest from this. In other words, God first says about Eli, I promised you, or my intent was to have your family carry on this tradition forever. I'm removing myself far away from this promise. In other words, I will not. I'm distancing myself from this vow or from this promise, because that promise will not come to fruition. I'm not touching that. I'm not coming anywhere near that promise, because I will only honor those that honor me, and those that scorn me, those that shame me, will be dishonored. Or yekalu comes from kalu, is almost will be lightened or could be seen as will receive death or cut off.
I have a question. I don't mean to monopolize, but the notion of a hierarchy of Kohanim, of the first rank of Kohanim that serve in the temple, and then this menace that you'll be demoted to the second rank where you'll have to beg for your crust of bread. Do you have any notion of what Kohanim who the second rank of Kohanim, the average Kohen, what were their responsibilities if not those of service in the temple?
So there were a lot of and I'm certainly not an expert in this area, but you have to understand. Think of it for a second, the temple and how busy it was in terms of slaughtering, cleaning, picking up pieces, preparing properly. There were certainly duties that were not as coveted as other as the ones that were literally in performing the rituals themselves. There was definitely a hierarchy of kehuna. As I mentioned, there were different families. There were originally there were four offsprings for Aaron, and originally it was Elazar that was supposed to have the kehuna. It was later on, if I'm mistaken, brought down to Itamar. All the other ones were subordinate in that they performed duties that enabled the Kohanim to perform theirs. So, as an example, I mean, if you want to look at it, the limelight when you see a movie are the actors, the primary actors, right? They're the ones. Yeah, but you have also the people who dress them correctly, who do this, bring them their sandwiches, work with the lines. They get almost no credit. Yeah, at the end they'll get a little credit, blah 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 blah, but nobody who knows who they are. And you can't, and the fame and the fortune. And I'm not saying about saying that the Kohanim necessarily were like, like fame but they were compensated, or they had the rights to be compensated in a greater form. They were also, you may have dealt with the lesser Kohanim dealt with sacrifices where the Kohanim didn't receive any food off it. So imagine you're there cutting, you can't, and then finally, somebody brings you a little piece of meat or some kind of, bread, or you had to maybe go out and actually fend for yourself or buy it yourself, because it might have not been enough that day. Go home without anything to bring home, versus those that are working on the sacrifices where they're getting portions of it to take with them. So, I mean, by and large, it was split quite evenly. But if there is this dissension, which was very clear, if these two people are hogging things for themselves, and as was suggested, was they want not so much about eating, because there's only so much that you can eat, but they're selling it to get rich. They're most likely would go around for every, as many as they can get. They were pushing other Kohanim out of the side too. So there was definitely some kind of hierarchy. I can't tell you. I don't know exactly which family received what, but there were different duties that you were compensated, again, not only by money, but compensated as well by food or other luxuries, so to speak, that you had. Kind of like, clergy now has, you have your home, you have this. We have other benefits because of what we do. And the hierarchy was definitely present.
Yossi,
Yes.
earlier in Shoftim, we read about the Danites, about Dan, the tribe of Dan, and they appointed, like Jonathan, son of Gershom, to be their priest forever.
Right.
How did this, was there any interaction between the priests from Dan, the tribe of Dan, and Eli's family?
No, they don't forget, it was not only that, it was that priest from Dan, if you remember, was a Levi.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And later on he was, later on he was, a lot of those stories, and then they fell apart, whether they were killed or just fell aside and nobody followed them. A lot of it was just demonstrations of how far the Israelites were removed in terms of not only morals, but their search for some kind of structure that only a couple of hundred ago they were coming out of Egypt, but it was not yet established in Israel because of they just came in. Perhaps they were unable to do that because they didn't have expertise, they didn't have any experience in creating a society. They used to live in a much smaller, tribal relationship where each governed their own, but that was not going to work. They needed a central governing body. In those days, that was religion, and that is and as well a public figure. Aside from the Kohen, I think this is also where we're working here, is the establishment of a king that was a little bit of maybe what we call today church and state, where we had the religion, but we had also, the people themselves. And yes, both were governed by the rules of the religion, but in terms of moving away from having the rules and everything from the temple, now you're going to have also secular kind of things, so to speak, not secular in the rules, but outside the domain or the control of the temple. You're going to get yourself a king, and that's what we're working to right now.
Yeah, but here it says that like Jonathan and his descendants served as priests to the Danite tribes until the land went into exile.
Right. Could be. I'm not so sure. I don't know much about that, but that's a great point. But it would have been a very, like, an outskirt or not a favorable way of that they were seen.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I mean, this was a couple of chapters back, that he was not even a Kohen, he was a Levi.
Yeah, it's in Judges chapter 18,
Yeah.
verse 30.
Yeah, he was a Levi. That he took it upon himself. Do you remember that? And he said, "Come and be for me a Kohen."
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, but again, a lot of it was just to give us an understanding, a background of where society was at what point the society was, and how they were lost, so to speak. Even though they didn't have the ability to connect, and they needed a way of connecting everybody. And we had the Shoftim, which worked every time a Shofet kind of came, and it gave a little bit of a sense of a togetherness, but then that dissipated. And now we're going to try to find a system where everybody is kind of getting. And if you remember, the ending of Shoftim was that everybody did that which they favored. In other words, it was I don't say lawlessness, but it was not coincident, because maybe what you think and what I think are different. So I did what I wanted, and you did what you wanted.
Yeah.
There's no consistency. And now we're going to try to bring everyone together. Okay.